Excellent. Woo. Coming in hot. Well, I'm going to do my best to try to get us back on schedule. Thankfully, this was my shorter lesson, but I'll watch the clock because I have a tendency to talk a lot. So just yell at me. So I already told David, I was like, when you get to go first, you can just go as long as you want. So. Little about me. Oh, it helps if I turn this on. It might work better. Let's see. Hey, this is my family. If you don't know, I'm from Louisville, Kentucky, originally Danville, Kentucky. It's my wife, Vicki, my son, Samuel, and daughter, Grace. This is a little fancier photo of the kiddos. And if you don't know our family, I would call us pet friendly. We have, let's see, 3 dogs, a cat, which I didn't invite the cat. All of the cat and beyond are all my daughter's pets. She has a tarantula. So if you like spiders, come visit us. Hermit crabs. She had a leopard gecko. It died, darn it. And then we also have a milk snake that she thought somebody was giving her a milkshake. It was a milk snake. And then, of course, my daughter was just determined she loves snakes. This is our pet, Carlos. This is a ball python that's about 4.5 to 5 feet long. And he has managed once or twice to get out of his cage. So if you come visit, he's not bit anyone, so that's a positive. So what I want you to do today, because, I'm going to assume the other 2 speakers are very in the deep end and doing, heavy stuff. I'm going to ask you to channel your 2 to 4-year-old inner self, right? And for some of you, that won't be too hard, right? I won't name which ones I think would fall into that category. But I want to present to you a lesson on something that I've been pondering for many years, and if you ever came to Paravel and heard me speak, this topic comes up quite often. The title is, That's Not Fair. And it's from Genesis all the way to Revelation. And I do want to thank the gathering committee for giving me the early time slot, so that, as I said, I can run over as long as I want, unless Guy tries to rip me off the stage. So, when you think about that's not fair, right? What exactly is that? What does it mean when you hear that's not fair? In order to understand what's not fair, we have to better understand what exactly fair is. Let's start by looking at just a few options and get your minds working this morning, even though we had all the singing early on that kind of got us started off in a good beat. Kentucky State Fair, right? This is a little screenshot of Louisville, my hometown. We have the Kentucky State Fair every August coming up in a few weeks. That's not what I'm talking about. Don't want to talk about the Kentucky State Fair. You also have the St. James Art Fair. There's a lot of you arties in here that might actually enjoy that. It's very artistic and showing off all the different wares. But again, not what I'm wanting to talk about today. Dark complexion, fair complexion, no, same thing. Not what I'm wanting to talk about today. So we've seen examples of what fair isn't, right? The fair that I don't want. So what is the context for our topic? Think about how many times you have heard somebody say, "That's not fair." I will tell you, you normally think of little kids, right? Hence why I told you to channel your 2 to 4-year-old self. Little kids have a tendency to, scream, "That's not fair." Hopefully you adults aren't quite as dramatic. But you can just picture the little girl going, "That's not fair," right? This isn't fair. And amazingly enough, I will share a little anecdote. At work this week, was sitting talking to someone about a job situation that I was in. And on cue, she looks at me and goes, "That's not fair." I'm like, excellent. I'm glad I wasn't the only one that felt that way. But so we all go through those examples of where, from time to time, we might say to ourselves, "That's not fair." So this little girl, definitely thinking that's not fair, right? You can just, something did not go her way, right? And I wonder sometimes if we've sometimes had the same visual expression on our faces when things didn't go the way that we wanted them to. Probably say that I'm guilty. So even if sometimes when we don't think about "that's not fair," we may not scream it out loud, right? Uh-oh, I can't walk away from the... But you may not get the actual verbalize it, right? Because you're more sophisticated, you're mature, and you're not going to scream like a 2-year-old and say, "That's not fair." But do you think about it? Is it in your head? Do you sit there and go, "That's not fair"? Well, that's what got me to this talk today, right? I've been through more than my share, well, I won't say it's more than my share, enough of "that's not fair" moments that got me here. So most of us adults have learned to just think about it and not say it out loud. Now, whether it is when another kid takes their favorite toy, or a classmate gets something better to eat at lunch, or they didn't get picked for the lead role in the play, you can almost read this little girl's thoughts as the eyes tell it all. She ain't happy. I remember as a kid complaining that it wasn't fair that my older brother got to stay up later than I did. I can remember saying it about classmates as well at one time or another. Why does the teacher treat them better than me? Why did others get to be 6 foot tall and I didn't? It's not fair, right? I'm only like 5'9" on a good day. Ish. Who said ish? So many times we go through life and we think things are not fair. So how many times have you actually said this yourself? And I'm not talking about when you were a little kid. Have you said or at least thought about it in the last 10 years? The last 10 months? Maybe the last 10 minutes, right? Maybe the Kahoot game. It's not fair. You pick questions that I don't know the answers to, right? Many times we get into this thing and we think about things that are not fair to us. So, has anyone in the last week verbalized out loud, "That's not fair"? Me? I'm the only one that said that's not fair? Come on, people, wake up. So when you think about "that's not fair," it's something that we all do. If you didn't raise your hand, have you ever got upset when somebody pulled into the fast lane and you're behind them and they won't get out of your way? David raised it. I could see you getting upset at that, yeah. Probably myself too. What about if someone cut you off? This is the same concept of our internal desire for fairness and doing what is right. Those of you slow drivers out there, get out of the left lane, right? We have this innate sense of fairness, and we'll get into that a little later, that we're truly, we didn't teach our little children to say that's not fair, did we? Or at least I didn't, right? But somehow they knew it. They would just look at you and go, that's not fair. Well, when life comes at you, right? Many times as adults, we're going to look at it and tell someone, that's life. Get over it, right? Anyone ever thought that about somebody else? Yeah, whiny butt. Why are you whining all the time? Life is difficult. Deal with it. Hopefully we don't do that to our children. But sometimes ponder to yourself, do you do this with God? Does God look at you and go, God, get over it, deal with it? I wonder sometimes, maybe he does, right? He's like, come on. So I expect we have all, more often than we care to admit, said, that's not fair, even if we just said it to ourselves. When it is us feeling that way, we want everyone to sympathize with us and realize how unfair our circumstance is. However, when it's someone else, we tend to think, get over it. It's not that big of a deal. What image comes to mind when you think of fair? Not the State Fair, not the St. James Art Fair. Maybe you think about Lady Justice. Lady Justice has a set of scales in one hand to represent weighing the facts of both sides of an issue. The sword in her other hand is to show swift justice. Punishment for doing wrong or evil. She wears a blindfold to show that her justice is blind. It doesn't matter who you are, what you look like, where you're from, the justice is supposed to be blind to those attributes. If you look close, really close, down at the bottom of her feet, what do you see? You'll see a snake at her feet, which represents evil and injustice. Poor Carlos, he's not evil and unjust. He's just a captive snake that is hungry. The scales reflect how most of us see fairness. The engineer in me loves the fact that this is pretty much an exact science. Right? You can weigh something precisely by simply putting a weight on one side and whatever you want to measure on the other. Scales were even mentioned in the Bible. God told the Israelites that they should use honest scales. In Deuteronomy 25:13-15, it says, you must use accurate scales when you weigh out merchandise, and you must use full and honest measures. Yes, always use honest weights and measures so that you may enjoy life in the land that your God is giving you. So, if you don't think about Lady Justice as maybe your sense of how you may determine fair, what about Jesus? Does he come to mind when you're thinking about, are things fair? I would hope all of us believe that Jesus would be fair, right? While we all learned about fairness in childhood, scientists have proven that we're actually hardwired for it. Studies have shown that the reward centers of our brain activate when we recognize fairness, even when it pertains to someone else. When we witness unfairness, it triggers our amygdala, that bad part of your brain, for lack of a better description, but it's a primitive part of the brain that controls our fear and our anger. This means that when we feel like we've been treated unfairly, we go into fight or flight mode with its resulting sense of anxiety. Does that ring true with anyone? When you're getting that sense of unfairness, and I will give you a little aside. This all started for me probably over a decade ago with a situation that happened to me. But it's funny, as I was working on this talk, the one thing of giving a lesson here is, it gave me a chance to tell my coworkers about what I'm doing this week, right? And so I say, hey, I'm doing this lesson, and oh, by the way, the topic is, that's not fair, right? And I remember telling them, I said, I gave, where the story started and everything with work, because especially the ones that have known me for a long time. And so we're talking about it, and I say to them, I said, I really hope God doesn't have a sense of humor, because I was in a situation where we just got reorged, right? This massive reorganization, and Keith got stuck over here in no man's land by himself. And I'm like, I was told, you're gonna get a team, we just don't know who your team is. And I'm like, boy, I sure hope God doesn't have a sense of humor and gives me more fodder for my lesson this week. And so everybody got a big kick out of that. Well, amazingly enough, I got more material for my lesson. But David, you laughed, and I will tell you, working on this lesson, I did the exact same thing, because this lesson is for me. It's one written to myself to learn about what that's not fair is, and why does God let things that I don't think are fair happen. And so I'm hoping that my message to you this week gets you thinking, and that you too, even when times get tough, that you're able to kind of laugh at it and go, it'll be okay. God has a plan. Psychologists suggest that when we fight for fairness for others, it's actually self-interest in disguise, meaning we've recognized it provides us with some type of advantage to be fair. No matter how you slice it, we experience a strong, instant physical and biological reaction to perceived injustices. And this can limit our ability to think rationally and respond proactively. So is it any wonder that we have a heightened perception of things that we perceive as unfair? We want everything in life to fit into our idea of fair. And unfortunately, that's not always the case. I began my thought process on this several years ago when I felt like I was being treated unfair. And I was very frustrated by it. I was like, why me? Anyone ever asked that? Why me? Why is this happening to me? I'll come back to this in a later lesson, but it was at this time I decided to try and better understand the concept of fairness, and became even more acutely aware of situations that I deemed to be unfair. I began seeing them in what seemed like the most unlikely of places. In the Bible. The more I looked and read, the more situations I found. It became a recurring theme in any lesson that I gave. In fact, I'm going to test your memory. If you were here at last year's gathering, I gave the sermon on Sunday. And in that sermon, I gave you a little snippet preview of one of those that's not fair moments. And it was about Joseph. I hope you can hang with me throughout the week as I walk you through the Bible, giving you examples of things that I believe fit into the "that's not fair" category. My goal with this talk is to walk you through the Bible and show you things that if we were to put ourselves in the situation of the passage, we might just say, "That's not fair." These things can be found all the way at the beginning in the book of Genesis. I'm going to give you a little Kentucky Paraphrase Bible here. After God created Adam, and Adam had been in the garden for a really long time, he started to get a little lonely. So Adam went to God and said, "This garden is amazing, but I'm starting to get a little lonely. Is there anyone that you can send to help keep me company?" God answered, "I have the perfect person. She will help you with almost everything. She'll clean, cook, wash your clothes, be your friend, and even rub your feet after a long day. She really is perfect in every way." Adam said, "That sounds great. How soon can you send for her?" God replied again, "I can send her right away, but there's just one thing. It's going to cost you an arm and a leg to get her." Adam thought for a moment and then said, "What can I get for a rib?" Sorry, ladies. I will get the guys later, but wanted to give you just a little sense of humor, because part of when we're reading through this, I don't want you to get the sense that I am trying to inject things in the Bible that aren't there, but it is something that I hope that you go away, that you yourself, when you're doing even your daily Bible readings, you start to pick up on those "that's not fair" moments. So what about Adam and Eve? What could possibly be considered unfair with them? Adam was alone initially. He could have thought God was unfair because he was all alone. But even God recognized that Adam was alone. And it says, "The Lord God said, 'It's not good for man to be alone. I will make a helper that is just right for him.'" So, however, shortly after that, Eve was created. Adam and Eve ate the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They hid themselves. They tried to hide from God, which, by the way, not a real good idea to try to play hide and seek with God. My guess is he's going to find you. So God comes and says, "Where are you?" And he says, they say, "I heard you walking in the garden, so I hid. I was afraid. I was naked." So he asks them the question, "Who told you were naked?" And he goes, "Have you eaten of the tree I told you not to eat?" And so Adam, does he fess up and say, "Absolutely, I did the wrong thing"? Because that's exactly what we would do, right? We always admit when we mess up. But God is asking him, not because he doesn't know, right? I mean, why did God ask a rhetorical question? God knew that Adam was lying. So, but in this case, Adam sort of told the truth, right? Because did he take it and says, "God, I did what you told me not to do," right? No, that's not exactly how Adam did it. He goes, "It was the woman. She gave it to me, and then I ate it." See, he should have gone for the arm and a leg version. She might not have tempted him that way. So Eve, he blames for giving him the fruit, right? It wasn't his fault. I was innocent. I was doing the right things, but then you gave me this woman. And eventually, not only does he say that Eve did it, says he actually blamed God, because he said, "The woman you gave me," right? So it's God's fault. It's either Eve's fault or God's fault. It's not my fault. And so you think about this, and when God does these things, is that fair? Was God fair to give Adam Eve? Right? He gave him someone that tempted him, and he ended up doing the wrong thing. So Another option that we have in the early part of the Genesis message is the story of Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel is a good example of that's not fair, right? And where I'm going to go with this, it says, Abel also brought a gift, the best portions of the firstborn lambs from his flock. The Lord accepted Abel and his gift. So God gave him a attaboy, right? Abel did the right thing. In Hebrews 11:4, it says, it was by faith that Abel brought a more acceptable offering to God than Cain did. Abel's offering gave evidence that he was a righteous man, and God showed his approval of his gifts. Although Abel is long dead, he still speaks to us by his example of faith. Abel did it right. But he did not accept Cain and his gift. This made Cain very angry. He probably said, that's not fair, right? Why do you like Abel? And he looked dejected. And the Lord said, why are you so angry? Why do you look so dejected? And what happened? Cain finally got so frustrated that he went out and killed Abel. Why did God allow Cain to kill Abel? When you think about what was going on, Abel was doing things right. Hebrews tells us so, right? He's listed among the faithful. God wasn't happy with Cain, but he was happy with Abel. So why did God allow Cain to kill Abel? I don't know about you, but sometimes I read things like that and I go, that's not fair. Why did God allow Cain, who did everything right? There's not a written word in the Bible that says anything negative about Abel. And yet you have Cain, who did bad, right? He didn't do what God wanted. We don't see that God punished Cain early on, right? He just said, here's the example of what I want. Your brother did it right. So why did God allow Cain to kill Abel? Do you ever stop and ponder that? Or do we've read it so many times that we just gloss over it and go, yep, Cain killed Abel. Move on with the rest of our story. But it's a very good example of what I'm going to get into the rest of this week about that's not fair. Because how many times in our own lives do we say to ourselves, God, I'm trying to do what you want me to do. I may not do my daily Bible reading every day. I try to catch up where I can. I try to obey everything you want me to do. I go to church. And yet, you let these bad things happen to me. Why? Why, God? And more importantly, we say to ourselves, why me? Why, God, do you allow this to happen to me? So as we go through this week, we're going to be looking at more examples. And I'm not even able to touch on half, probably not even a tenth of the ones that I've come across. But I'm hoping that it instills in you something by the end of the week that you take away something from the Bible that you may not have ever taken away before. And God's always speaking to us through His Word, isn't He? And sometimes it takes just a little twist to get you thinking about something that you may never have thought about before. And so don't think that I'm just trying to be a, whiny 2 to 4 year old saying that's not fair. But I'm hoping you become like myself, although I'm not going to pretend that I never still say that's not fair, right? But I will tell you that, like the example I gave, I truly did laugh, right? I mean, and what was funny was my coworkers came to me and they were laughing too. And he goes, well, I guess you can add that to your lesson. And I'm like, thanks guys, really appreciate it. But at the end of the day, could I have changed? I couldn't change my situation. So why not laugh at it, right? And that's the message that I'm hoping you get out of this, is that you have to ultimately trust God has a plan. Might not be Keith's plan, might not be your plan, but God has a plan. When we look at Abel, is that fair? Why did God allow that to happen? I don't have a good answer for that, right? I mean, to me, if Keith wrote the story, what would Keith say? Cain gets bit by a snake, dies, and Abel lives happily ever after. That's Keith's version. But unlike my little example, Keith didn't write the Bible. God did. And God does things His way. Thank you.